this bright new day of the 20th of February, 2108, and these men and women are the members of the New Zealand Rediscovery Expedition to North America. Spared by the belligerents of the Third World War, not, I need hardly say, for any humanitarian reason, but simply because, like Equatorial Africa, it was too remote to be worth anyone's while to obliterate, New Zealand survived and even modestly flourished in an isolation which, because of the dangerously radioactive condition of the rest of the world, remained for more than a century almost absolute.
Welcome to Our Nuclear Nightmares, a series examining the literature of the nuclear age. The following program contains material and themes that some listeners may find disturbing. Discretion is advised. Episode 4. Ape and Essence. The year is 1948. British colonial forces, facing increasing unrest in Malaysia, declare an emergency and employ terror tactics against the civilian population. Farmland is destroyed, livestock is slaughtered, food is rationed, and 1 million people are herded into concentration camps while death squads kill independence fighters and any suspected sympathizers. The Netherlands transfers sovereignty to the Republic of Indonesia after 4 years of fighting that saw Dutch military forces burning villages and massacring civilians to regain control of their colonial possession. The transfer only happens after the United States threatens to cut off all aid to the Netherlands. The Legislative Assembly of Costa Rica, dominated by the National Republican Party, votes to annul the election, claiming that Otío Olate Blanco won through fraud. José Figueres Ferreira leads a successful rebellion against the government and guides the creation of a new expanded constitution for the nation. Ape and Essence was written by Aldous Huxley and first published in the United States by Harper & Brothers. Ape and Essence begins with a comment on human narcissism. Briggs' self-centeredness and self-absorption contrasted with the assassination of Gandhi, an event that would drastically alter India's future. Briggs' situation, as he explains to his colleague Lou Lubin, is entirely self-inflicted, in that as Mr. Selene demanded a divorce from his wife Miriam if their relationship was going to continue. Miriam refused to grant a divorce and then used her power of attorney to take control of all of their assets. Briggs complains about these events not in the manner of someone torn apart by desire or love, so much as indignation that he hasn't gotten his way. Briggs and Lubin, the latter the narrator for this section, walk through the movie studio lot past huts where filming is in production, including one for the star Head of Body. They are nearly run down by a truck coming from the story department hauling scripts destined for the incinerator, which takes a turn too quickly and dumps them across the road. Lubin picks up a random script, which is titled Ape and Essence, credited to a William Tallis, and reads a section to Briggs. The next day, for reasons not entirely explained, Briggs and Lubin head to the fictional town of Murcia to find Tallis. When they reach the address Tallis provided, they meet a Miss Coulson who informs them that the writer died several months ago, but invites them inside. Miss Coulson introduces Briggs and Lubin to her husband, their daughter who has a baby, and another granddaughter, Rosie, who is excited when she finds out that Briggs and Lubin are in the movie business. While Briggs goes off to talk to Rosie about movies with plans to make her his next mistress, Lubin stays with Miss Coulson to chat. Miss Coulson says Tallis had written the script in hopes of making money to send to his daughter from a marriage to a lady in Germany before the Great War.
Her words suddenly reminded me of something in the script. Something about children in post-war Europe prostituting themselves for bars of chocolate. The granddaughter, had she perhaps been one of those children? Ich give you chocolate, du give me Liebe, understand? They understood only too well. 1 Hershey bar now, 2 more afterward. What happened to the wife, I asked, and the granddaughter's parents? They passed on, said Miss Coulson. I guess they were Jewish something. Mind you, said the leprechaun suddenly, I don't have anything against the Jews, but all the same, he paused. Maybe Hitler wasn't so dumb after all.
After this anti-Semitic comment, Miss Coulson makes a remark about Tallis' second marriage to another woman that contains a hint that it was to the famous actress Head of Body. Lubin theorizes a history of Tallis and exchanges a few words with the Coulsons before forcefully suggesting to Briggs, who has ensnared Rosie with the promise of a screen test, that it is time they leave. At this juncture, the narrative shifts to present the movie script. The script is presented loosely. It does not adhere to industry formatting with things such as scene headings, transitions, or action lines. It takes a more free-form design with only the occasional character headings, such as for the narrator. The first scene is of well-dressed apes in a theater as a female ape in a dress comes on stage, dragging the scientist Michael Faraday behind her on a leash. She strikes him with a switch when he tries to straighten up before launching into a short song and dance. Faraday cries from humiliation and frustration while the ape sings, which causes her to turn and violently assault him while the audience applauds. The script then shifts to the sailing ship the Canterbury, which has come from New Zealand, one of the few places not hit during the nuclear war, and is carrying an expedition to North America. The next scene returns to the apes, who are divided into two groups in military uniforms, facing off against each other across a war-torn wasteland. Each side has dragged with them an Einstein on a leash.
Vertical stripes, horizontal stripes, noughts and crosses, eagles and hammers, mere arbitrary signs, but every reality to which a sign has been attached is thereby made subject to its sign. Goswami and Ali used to live at peace, but I got a flag, you got a flag, all baboon god's children got flags. So even Ali and Goswami got flags, and because of the flags it immediately became right and proper for the one with the foreskin to disembowel the one without a foreskin, and for the one circumcised to shoot the uncircumcised, rape his wife, and roast his children over slow fires. But meanwhile above the bunting float the huge shapes of clouds, and beyond the clouds is that blue void which is an emblem of our glassy essence, and at the foot of the flagstaff grows the wheat and the emerald green rice and the millet. Bread for the body and bread for the spirit. Our choice is between bread and bunting, I need hardly add, is what we have almost unanimously chosen.
After some martial music, each side also drags up a Louis Pasteur, who is forced to create a lethal gas to spray on the enemy. However, the gas fails to wipe out the opposition. The apes then violently abuse their respective Einsteins and shove them into a box to fiddle with dials until they create a nuclear weapon. Once the weapons are created, they are launched, and the apes settle into breakfast while they wait for the missiles to reach the other side. The scene switches back to the New Zealand expedition, which has approached the American coastline and has found an oil installation in surprisingly decent condition. The crew is introduced while they have an ill-tempered argument over the most effective method of killing off the population. There is Professor Krauge, a geologist, Professor Grampen, a biologist, Grampen's young wife, an anthropologist, Ethel Hook from the Department of Botany, Dr. Poole, who is also a botanist, Dr. Cudworth, an engineer, and Dr. Schneeglock, a psychologist. The script returns to the apes, who are dying from the nuclear exchange, along with the Einsteins who complained they were innocent of the nuclear holocaust because they were merely searching for truth, something the narrator dismisses as self-serving and deliberately naive. The scene switches back to the expedition scientists who have gone ashore and are taking samples and jotting down observations. While they are working, Hook tries to engage Dr. Poole in romantic talk, but fails as he happens to detest her. Later, when he is momentarily separated from the group, 3 ragged men appear out of the ruins of a house, grab him, tie him up, and drag him away. They take him into the ruins of Los Angeles and onto the grounds of a cemetery. The cemetery is not named, but is clearly the Hollywood Cemetery on Santa Monica Boulevard, where many stars are buried. At the time of the book's publication, the cemetery was segregated. Black people were not allowed to be buried there until 1959.
And now we are only 5 miles up, and it becomes increasingly obvious that the great metropolis is a ghost town. That what was once the world's largest oasis is now its greatest agglomeration of ruins in a wasteland. Nothing moves in the streets. Dunes of sand have drifted across the concrete. The avenues of palms and pepper trees have left no trace. The camera comes down over a large rectangular graveyard lying between the ferro-concrete towers of Hollywood and those of Wilshire Boulevard. We land, pass under an arched gateway, enjoy a tracking shot of mortuary gazebos, a baby pyramid, a Gothic sentry box, a marble sarcophagus surmounted by weeping seraphs.
On the cemetery grounds are survivors who are excavating one of the graves near a statue of the pre-war star Hedda Body. The women in the group have on crude clothing with patches that say no sewn over their breasts and crotch. They're overseen by a chief who is dressed in a ragged suit. Eventually they reach a coffin, which they pull out and loot the corpse of its jewelry. One of the men tries to pocket a ring but is spotted and given a lash for daring to steal. The suit is also removed from the corpse and given to the chief, who changes into it. Poole is dragged to the chief, who interrogates him as to where he's come from and what he does. When the chief learns that Poole is a scientist and comes from a place that still has machines, he demands Poole fix things and grows angry when Poole explains he can't fix things like engines. The chief hits Poole and orders him to be buried up to his waist, during which one of them mockingly asks why he doesn't grow roots. This prompts the desperate Poole to say he can help them grow food. The chief demands Poole swear an oath to Belial before having him dug back up. He puts 2 women named Flossie and Lula in charge of Poole, whom they dose with liquor so that he can have the strength to walk. Despite his increasing inebriation, Poole peppers the women with questions. He learns that the survivors consider temptation as evil, and those who sin are given deformed babies as punishment. These babies are killed during the rite of purification. Lula cries when she admits she is pregnant and believes that the baby will be born deformed. Poole comforts her, but also kisses her, which makes her stiffen and then run away. They reach a settlement where Poole is outraged to see library books being burned in bread-making ovens. His outrage is dismissed by the chief, who notes that the only word people can read is the word no. The chief shows Poole a class that is being taught by a satanic science practitioner.
Excellent. He wipes his forehead. And now tell me why you deserve everlasting perdition. There is a moment's silence. Then, in a chorus that starts a little raggedly but soon swells to a loud unanimity, the children answer. Belial has perverted and corrupted us in all the parts of our being. Therefore we are, merely on account of corruption, deservedly condemned by Belial. Their teacher nods approvingly. Such, he squeaks unctuously, is the inscrutable justice of the Lord of the Flies. Amen, respond the children. All make the sign of the horns. And what about your duty towards your neighbor? My duty towards my neighbor, comes the choral answer, is to do my best to prevent him from doing unto me what I should like to do unto him, to subject myself to all my governors, to keep my body in absolute chastity, except during the 2 weeks following Belial Day, and to do my duty in that state of life to which it hath pleased Belial to condemn me.
A girl is ordered to the front of the class to recite the nature of women, which contains a line, quote, "Woman is the vessel of the unholy spirit, source of all deformity, enemy of the race," unquote. After this, the chief takes Poole to a special building where a group of women is nurturing their babies, and Poole learns they were born all at the same time. The women have had their heads shaved and are considered shameful for having given birth to deformed offspring. Poole also encounters Lula again, who is trying to comfort her friend Polly, who is crying because she knows her child will be killed. After an interlude, the women and babies are taken to the Los Angeles Coliseum for an elaborate ceremony that begins with a long chant that culminates with the first woman being brought forward and her baby being killed with a knife. Poole faints at the sight of the blood and wakes sometime later in a comfortably furnished room of the archvicar. The archvicar lays out the tenets of their religion and how it developed out of a response to the world's self-destruction through the work of Belial. He explains how their violent, bloody worship of Belial is like throwing food at a tiger, an effort to gain some breathing space.
O God, he intones in a slightly tremulous voice that is always considered appropriate to such utterances. We thank thee for all these immortal souls. Then, changing his tone, these immortal souls, he goes on, lodged in bodies that grow progressively sicklier, scabbier, scrubbier, year after year, as all the things foreseen by Belial inevitably come to pass. The overcrowding of the planet, 500, 800, sometimes as many as 2,000 people to a square mile of food-producing land, and the land in process of being ruined by bad farming. Everywhere erosion. Everywhere the leaching out of minerals, and the desert spreading, the forests dwindling, even in America, even in that new world that was once the hope of the old. Up goes a spiral of industry, down goes a spiral of soil fertility, bigger and better, richer and hungrier.
Back on the blood-drenched floor of the Coliseum, the last baby has been sacrificed, and the mood suddenly changes as men and women indulge in an orgy of unrestrained lust. Poole is appalled by this, while the archvicar deems it part of the nature of Belial and mankind. He says that mating is only allowed for a short period, and for the rest of the year people must remain chaste. He also notes that about 5% of the survivors cannot contain their lust and are beaten or driven out. They serve as a useful internal enemy they can blame misfortune on, and a small colony of them exists near Fresno. After the archvicar finishes talking to Poole, he gathers his other aides and goes out to chant among the fornicating crowd. Lula suddenly reappears and throws herself on Poole, pleading with him to touch her, something that he quickly agrees to, ripping off her no patches. However, they are interrupted by a much stronger man who carries off Lula. Poole at first considers attacking the man but gives in to his fears and does nothing. The archvicar comes upon Poole and teases him for giving into lust, but also tells him that the New Zealand expedition has been trying to find him, but an armed group was sent out and drove them away, killing one. Poole takes the news without any reaction, and a moment later allows himself to be pulled back into the mating frenzy.
And this, too, is a beatific being, somebody who most certainly isn't Alfred Poole, DSC. For sleep is one of the preconditions of the incarnation, the primary instrument of divine immanence. Sleeping we cease to live, that we may be lived, how blessedly, by some nameless other, who takes this opportunity to restore the mind to sanity, and bring healing to the abused and self-tormented body. From breakfast to bedtime you may be doing everything in your power to outrage nature and deny the fact of your glassy essence. But even the angriest ape at last grows weary of his tricks and has to sleep. And while he sleeps, the indwelling compassion preserves him willy-nilly from the suicide which in his waking hours he has tried so frantically hard to commit.
The next morning, Lula finds Poole again and offers him some breakfast, and they awkwardly talk. Poole not wanting to discuss what happened while Lula is overcome when she thinks about what happened to Polly and her baby. They chat for a while, hesitantly expressing their feelings for each other. Lula saying she would only want to give herself to Poole, which would make her one of the reviled Hots. Their time is interrupted by an aide of the Archvicar who tells Poole he is being reassigned. The scene changes to the New Zealand expedition where the wounded, including a badly injured Hook, are being brought aboard. She pleads for them not to leave and abandon Poole, but the ship is destined to set out. Back with the survivors, Lula is assigned to digging up graves, which she protests at but backs down when threatened with violence. Poole is taken to a laboratory in the ruins of the University of Southern California, where the aides of the Archvicar set him up to perform botany and figure out how to boost food production. Several weeks later, Poole gives a presentation to the chief and the Archvicar about the severe degradation and contamination of the soil. Poole says the survivors need to embark on a long campaign of terracing to stop the land erosion, improving irrigation, and breeding new plant species resistant to pests and bacteria.
It wasn't because they couldn't, puts in the Archvicar. It was because they didn't want to. Between World War II and World War III, they had all the time and all the equipment they needed. But they preferred to amuse themselves with power politics. And what were the consequences? He counts off the answers on his thick fingers. Worse malnutrition for more people, more political unrest, resulting in more aggressive nationalism and imperialism. And finally, the thing. And why did they choose to destroy themselves? Because that was what Belial had wanted them to do. Because he had taken possession. The chief holds up his hand. Please, please, he protests. This isn't a course in apologetics or natural diabology. We are trying to do something. And unfortunately, the doing will take a long time, says Dr. Poole. How long? Well, in 5 years, you might find yourself holding your own against erosion. In 10 years, there'd be a perceptible improvement. In 20 years, some of your land might be back to as much as 70% of its original fertility. In 50 years? In 50 years, puts in the Archvicar, the deformity rate will be double what it is at present. And in 100 years, the triumph of Belial will be complete.
After the briefing, Poole sneaks off to see Lula, who is back digging in the Hollywood cemetery, and they talk about their feelings for each other. The next time Poole sees the Archvicar, he's strongly encouraged to join the upper echelon, but this will require him being castrated. When Poole sees Lula again, there is a long argument about the meaning and purpose of love. Later, when the Archvicar goes to visit Poole again at the laboratory, he finds him missing, and orders men on horses to hunt him down and recapture him. However, Poole has already escaped with Lula, and the two have reached the Mojave, where they come across a grave for William Tallis, the author of the script therein. They rest beside the grave, and Poole reads a selection from Percy Shelley as they share an egg. Ape and Essence is a challenging work in its ideas, language, and even narrative design. It is an endeavor to inspect not only the fractures in society, but its source in the human heart. The expedition that occupies a third of the novel is the first in nuclear age literature to employ the trope of explorers investigating an irradiated wasteland of a former nation. Post-apocalyptic journeys have been a popular method of social commentary of writers for over a century. Richard Jefferies' After London, published in 1885, is one of the earliest, followed by J. A. Mitchell's The Last American in 1889, which featured a Persian admiral who rediscovers America after an unspecified cataclysm. In the 1970s and 80s, there were dozens of novels and hundreds of short stories featuring people exploring a radioactive and ruined America. These stories would invariably portray the explorer as noble individuals bringing civilization and technology back to superstitious, violent, and barbaric survivors. In Ape and Essence, the survivors are all these things, but the author does not depict the explorers from New Zealand as saviors. Instead, they are people who share the same social and emotional problems as the survivors, the same issues that led to the destruction of the Old World. The expedition, composed of scientists, are unable to handle the dangers of the Old World and are powerless in the face of its degradation. The novel even interrogates the position of science in society. The scientific profession had maintained a generally positive reputation since the rise of humanism as part of the Renaissance in the 16th century. However, this began to change towards the end of the 19th century as pollution from the Industrial Revolution rose, followed by the industrial horrors of the Great War in the 20th. The atomic bomb brought about a wave of distrust in scientists, as they were viewed as having created something that could destroy humanity. Scientists were quick to claim that the scientific process itself was neutral, as if it magically took place outside of all political, social, and cultural influences and pressures. The apes that drag Einstein on stage to construct a nuclear weapon in the novel are a less than subtle way of demonstrating how scientific advancement is political, and those involved are not exempt from its consequences. It suggests that science, and by extension all intellect, can ultimately be suborned and debased by the violence of nationalism. This violence is accompanied by lust, with the baboons hungering for the provocatively dressed singer. The choice of baboons is interesting, as they were frequently the cause of complaint from early visitors to zoos because of their unrestrained public sex acts. The stance the Apocalypse Church has towards sex is also unhealthy, as it condemns it as sinful, thereby denying a part of human essence. The orgy permitted once a year is an attempt to wall off sexuality from society, but the result is a deformed act without love. Sex lies at the heart of another concern of the novel, with its emphasis on both overpopulation and coinciding overexploitation of nature. Both subjects have become of interest in the United States after the ecological disaster of the Dust Bowl, and in Europe as the scarcity of arable land caused mass migration. After the war, the subjects returned to mainstream discussion in 1948, with columns in the New York Times and the Saturday Review of Literature. That same year also saw the publication of Fairfield Osborne's Our Plundered Planet and William Vaught's Road to Survival. The discussion was drowned out by the growing tension of the Cold War, especially when a hot war broke out in Korea. It would return to the forefront in the late 50s and 60s due to a wave of ecological disasters such as at Minamata in Japan, the Lake Erie fire in the United States, and acid rain devastated Europe. People were gradually becoming aware there were limits to what the planet could sustain in terms of farming and resource extraction. In the novel, Poole notes that without concerted action, the topsoil that supports nearly all life will be lost. The nuclear holocaust still threatens to be the end of humanity with stillbirths and mutations from radiation, but it is not the only focus. It is only one of several apocalypses. Huxley believes science was a causative factor in the degradation of not only the planet, but also liberty as it facilitated the centralization of power. Technology allowed those in power to control people more effectively and efficiently. He belonged to a particular breed of intellectual that arose in England after the First World War and wanted to return to small, simple farms and communities. They distrusted science as it meant mass production and the accompanying terrible working conditions and environmental pollution. However, they were unable or unwilling to understand the capitalist system as the cause of these issues. As such, they refused to consider socialist, communist, or even anarchist collectives and sought to retreat to an idealized past. In Huxley's previous book, Science, Liberty, and Peace, he wrote about the problem of centralization, science, and the struggle of liberty that people encountered. In the novel, the problem lies in the essence of mankind, portrayed as little more than apes, not only in the tendency towards violence and lust, but in stratified social systems, the overconsumption of products, the distorting use of science, the conflict between indulgence and puritanical shame, of societies susceptible to the power of mass media. The society in the post-apocalyptic landscape of California views human essence as fundamentally wicked, and has constructed an oppressive system to control it. These echo the repressive antagonistic structures of churches, political parties, and nationalist thought. From birth, the survivors are programmed with a rigid educational system, stripped of their individuality and desires, suppressed and shamed for their essence. But this is shown as not only a failure but with horrific consequences, as the system still has to exile and execute members. They have nothing to call their own. Their clothes and jewels are taken from the dead, and they burn the books they can no longer read for fuel. All of this set against a radioactive landscape and degraded ecosystem because of this failure to reconcile. Although the depiction of the church might give the impression that Huxley was an atheist, this is far from the case. Huxley did not belong to any particular denomination, but he had his own personal belief system, partially based in Vedantism. He also believed that secularism was the cause of many issues in the world, that without faith people were like animals. This was a common complaint after the Second World War, one which conveniently ignored the horrors inflicted by Europe as it built its overseas empires. He was quick to believe people would act like animals. Tellingly, he has the archvicar say, quote, "And immediately there were 8 millions of people trampling one another to death on the bridges and in the tunnels, and the survivors scattered through the countryside like locusts, like a horde of plague-infested rats, fouling the water supply, spreading typhoid and diphtheria and venereal disease, biting, clawing, looting, murdering, raping, feeding on dead dogs and the corpses of children," unquote. In the end, Huxley shared the same simplistic, dim view of humanity of many other writers in the genre. He also had a dim view of his own purpose, at least in offering a warning. The author was disheartened by his time in Hollywood, where he felt his writing was sidelined for more commercial work. The fictional Tallis, also a screenwriter, underlines, quote, "for the incinerator," unquote, on a screenplay as if he had lost faith in it. In the screenplay, he has a character describe himself as a sad, lonely man, connecting back to the loss of his lover. Yet the screenplay is rescued from being burned by Colston in the same manner Poole rescues Epipsychidion, Percy Bysshe Shelley's meditation on love from 1821. And as Poole and Lula sit by the grave, they crack an egg over it and scatter the shell, an old symbol of rebirth. It's this faint hope that runs through the novel, along with its warning. If you found this episode interesting, entertaining, or a useful sleeping aid, please consider subscribing to the Patreon. This series is only possible through listener support. You can also help by leaving a review on iTunes or Spotify.